Welcome. Good evening. Thank you so much. Welcome to the Richard Nixon Presidential Library. My name is Jonathan Mavroidis. I'm with the Richard Nixon Foundation. Tonight you're in for a great discussion, but before we kick it off, I'd just like to make a brief introduction. A lot of you come here for our distinguished speakers, people accomplished in the fields of diplomacy, public policy, the media, and business. This past year has been pretty incredible for us, especially as we're gearing up for the renovation of our exhibits. But we've also had a stellar lineup of speakers from the ambassador of Israel, the former director of the CIA, 3 4-star generals representing different parts of the armed services, the top columnist at the Wall Street Journal, the world champion of chess, the vice president of the United States, the former CEO of General Electric, the former commissioner of the New York City Police Department, 3 presidential candidates, just to name a few. But this wouldn't be a forward-thinking public affairs institution if we didn't hear from the next generation, the Millennial generation, our next leaders in thought and action. President Nixon said that the youth infuse into the country some idealism, some courage, some stamina, some high moral purpose that this nation always needs. Because a country throughout history we find goes through ebbs and flows of idealism. Time after time, the country needs an infusion of new spirit, the infusion of youth. I'd like to introduce 2 people who couldn't have organized this event, who I couldn't have organized this event without. Robert and Megan Zwerling are the principals of US Vigilance. They're a father-daughter team who are dedicated to bringing the fidelity of the United States Constitution and the Republican form of government. Megan is an undergraduate at the University of South Carolina, where she's studying biomedical engineering, and Robert is a high-tech business executive in Orange County. They've been an absolute pleasure to work with. To that end, their mission is to encourage reasoned debate on public policy and the development of responsible citizenship, which is why we're here tonight. Based on this mission, the 2 recently released an excellent book that everyone should read. It's called Vigilance, The Price of Liberty: What You Can Do Today to Save America Tomorrow. And they'd be happy, after this event, they'd be happy to meet each and every one of you and sign a copy of their book, which is available in our store for purchase. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Robert and Megan Zwerling.
Thank you, and good evening. Wonderful to have you here. Jonathan, thank you for arranging all this. Thank you for hosting this. It's a great place to be tonight. And tonight, we get to be Americans. We get to listen to different points of view. And where this all started from was a college application that my daughter wrote. And I'll let her tell you how we started the journey that began and then culminated in writing a book and then being here tonight.
So, junior in high school, writing my college application essays, or at least drafting them, because I was a good student. I started early. So the question was posed: what is the biggest issue facing yourself, your community, your generation, and to explain. So in short, I answered that government has become too large to sustain and too opaque to be accountable, which diminishes its ability to do the public good. To that, my dear father responded with what I thought was a joke, that we should write a book about this. And so the journey began.
And so we did. And the book is a journey of 2 generations. I looked at the future and said, my daughter's in peril. I don't see how she will achieve the American dream, because I don't see the American dream necessarily being available unless her generation does something about it. And from her perspective,
I saw the same thing. So that's why we're here tonight, to start the discussion, to talk about the issues. So I'm happy you guys are all here tonight, and I'd like to introduce the video.
So before I get into that, and we'll take a look at the video, I'd I'd also like to say something on the journey that we have. If any of you ever have a chance to write a book with your son or your daughter, do it. It's a wonderful adventure. We went through American history together, we developed a working knowledge of the Constitution, and we analyzed where we are today, and we wrote about it in the book. And then we offered 7 solutions to save America before bedtime. So here we are today, and first thing we'd like to introduce is the resolution that we're going to talk about, which is political correctness on college campuses, an enemy of free speech. And from there, we'll start with a video.
Is political correctness a protected right? The Constitution says nothing about it. However, the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights does protect the right of free speech. Millennials are now the guardians of the future. Their votes will determine the fate of free speech. They can look back at June 22, 1970, when President Richard Nixon signed the 26th Amendment, giving 18-year-olds the right to vote.
I believe that you will represent America well abroad. The reason I believe that your generation, the 11 million new voters, will do so much for America at home is that you will infuse into this country some idealism, some courage, some stamina, some high moral purpose that this nation always needs. Because a country, throughout history, we find, goes through ebbs and flows of idealism. And time after time, the country needs an infusion of new spirit, an infusion of youth. You are bringing that.
But voting itself does not protect freedom. Even in Cuba, people vote. Voting only works when people have the power to speak with dissenting views. Dissent has a long history on school campuses. In 1964, on the campus of the University of California at Berkeley, students demanded an end to the school's ban of political activities. That year, campus protesters kicked off the free speech movement at Berkeley. Today's students don't have free speech high on their agenda, to put it mildly, wrote Charles Koeller, Claremont McKenna Professor of Government. In 2015, the National Review magazine listed some of the most ridiculous PC moments of 2015, including an op-ed in Swarthmore College's newspaper calling hating pumpkin spice lattes sexist. Political correctness on college campuses requires speech codes and boundaries for speech. The core of these policies involves trigger warnings, microaggression, and safe spaces. There are those who say free speech is alive and well, that people who are intimidated to speak are just, well, intimidated. No one is stopping their speech. But tell that to college administrators, professors, and students that have been fired, forced to resign, or expelled for breaking PC codes. So is political correctness simply media hype? After all, the campus stories that fill the news reflect only a handful of the 5,000 colleges in the US. Maybe, but a 2010 study found that only 30% of college seniors strongly agreed with the position, is it safe to hold unpopular positions on this campus? Welcome to the Collegiate Forum at the Nixon Presidential Library. Tonight's resolution, is political correctness on college campuses an enemy of free speech?
So our format tonight will have 5 outstanding college students here from 5 outstanding universities, and they will be up here moderated by also an outstanding moderator, and, or I should say, in Trumpanese, amazing moderator, absolutely amazing. And so the format will be, there'll be moderated questions. They'll be given by our moderator to our panelists. And then we're going to follow that with questions to the audience. And you'll be able to answer that, ask the panelists directly. So Megan?
So I'd like to introduce our wonderful moderator, Alicia Krause. She is a talk radio co-host on The Morning Answer with Ben Shapiro and Brian Whitman on KRLA and KTIE. She is also the director of outreach for PragerU, And before moving to Southern California to join the Morning Answer team, she was senior producer for The Sean Hannity Show and a campaign manager as well as a media consultant. Let's welcome Alicia Krause.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's a lovely night to be at this beautiful library. Did you know that this is a replica of the East Room at the White House? I don't know if anybody told you that when you walked in. The docents here are absolutely amazing. I am Alicia Krause. I'm very excited to be here tonight and ask you some questions that I loved working on with Robert and Megan, but also had contributions from our student ambassadors at PragerU as well, who are on campuses all across the country and cannot be here tonight, but look forward to watching the video, which will be available online. I'd love to start the event before I get the panelists up here, because I don't want to put them in a super awkward position, but I mean, come on, we're just a few days away from New York, and for the first time ever, California's primary is going to make a massive difference in the presidential race. So, and the Democrats, of course, are debating in New York tonight. I've been following it online, and apparently it's super duper boring, but what else did we expect? But if there is anybody in the audience, I'd love to do kind of like by rounds of applause or booing or jeering if you want. I personally think that Congress should be more like Parliament. I love to watch Parliament when they're like, here, here, and you, sir, and like, it's so much fun, especially with the accents and everything. So by a round of applause or booing and jeering, is anybody here this evening in support of Bernie Sanders? Wow, some brave souls raised their hands, nice.
Yes, I want him to beat Hillary.
Okay, and Hillary Clinton, anyone in here fans of Hillary Clinton? Welcome. Okay, now, I'm going to include John Kasich just to be nice, because he's technically still in the race. And Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz. And he would not call me amazing. I appreciate you doing so. He actually doesn't like me that much. But Donald J. Trump. Are you responsible for writing chalk on the campus of UCSD? No, I'm kidding. Just kidding. So with that, now that we have that over with, I didn't want to put our panelists in an entirely awkward position. Y'all have to see how they voted. Let's introduce our panelists, ladies and gentlemen. If you could just hold your round of applause for this incredible group we've gathered until they start to come up on the stage, please. We have Andrew Mather. He is a senior at Stanford who is pursuing a degree in symbolic systems with a focus in decision making. He is a native of Newport Beach, California. Mather has developed strong interest in ethics and behavioral science through his coursework and has guided his approach to difficult problems. Mather has encountered the issues surrounding free speech firsthand as a resident assistant in an all-freshman dormitory and as a columnist and deputy editor for the Stanford Daily. Christopher Weeks is a senior diplomacy and world affairs major at Occidental College. Last year, he served as president of his college's student government. Originally from New Hampshire, home to the first in the nation primary, Christopher has always been fascinated by political issues. Nic Jaber is a senior and at the University of California, Berkeley. Nic formally studies philosophy and pursues minor interests in Arabic language and Middle Eastern North African affairs. He is currently an analyst with Capital Investments at Berkeley and vice president of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, Berks Society. Kyle Koeller is a senior from Chapman University. Kyle is a double major in PR advertising and political science and is the president of the Chapman Republicans and is currently working as a government affairs analyst at Procure America. And last but not least, Stephen Glick is a junior at Pomona College studying economics and math and serves as the editor-in-chief of the Claremont Independent. Stephen has repeatedly brought political correctness issues at the Claremont colleges to the national stage, including 2 appearances on Fox News and NPR. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel for this evening. And when we did the introductions downstairs, I was like, I'm Alicia, and I'm a dropout. But it's so much fun to be here. So let's get started on the resolution for this evening. Kyle, I'd like to start with you, if I may. Is political correctness indoctrination, or do you think it's just good moral teaching?
Can you guys hear me all right? Good? Okay, good. Elisha, thank you for moderating, and thank you all for being here. It's been a great time getting to know everyone at the Nixon Library and the Nixon Foundation, as well as everyone on the panel. In terms of academia, I think there's a clear liberal bias. One need look no further than the Ivy Leagues. In the 2012 presidential election, 96% of faculty and staff donations went to Barack Obama, with 4% going to Mitt Romney. Now, it's the top students in the nation being taught what to think instead of how to think here. And if that's not an environment of indoctrination, I don't really know what is.
I'd like to come in if I can. I totally agree with you, Kyle, and I think there's another element to this as well. I would characterize this political correctness as something, in fact, more pernicious. It's a pervasive insecurity that's ballooned into a norm that we're finding in public and private spheres all over the country, not just in college campuses, but in our political circles, in our communities, and so on. So I would call this an intense insecurity among some of us that is cause for great concern as we think about what it's going to take to sustain our democracy and educate people well moving forward.
I'll maybe push back a little bit on those previous answers. I think that in terms of whether this political correctness is actually indoctrination, and I'd love to hear actually other people's experiences on this, but in terms of my experience in education, mostly what I've had, and even if a lot of my professors have had a pretty strong liberal bias, it's mainly been to challenge opinions and to really make sure that the opinions are justified and to really foster an academic debate, which I think is very much kind of at the focus of college. And I'd like to hear, whatever other people have to think about that, and just...
So you've never experienced, or you've never witnessed on your campus an experience where you think that the faculty or staff was punishing maybe someone for their political opinions?
I think those situations attract a lot of media attention, but I think they're maybe more rare, at least in my experience, than I've actually found on a campus. And I think that, really what I'm getting at is the important thing when you have a view is that you've really thought through a political view and can really justify the view. And one of the important parts of that is to be challenged on that view. And I think ultimately, ideally that challenge should come from both a liberal and a conservative side, but I really think that is an important part of the collegiate education.
Do any of you object or agree with that? Do you think that on college campuses you're hearing from your faculty and administration, and even fellow students in the dialogue, equal arguments from both sides, or do you think it's one-sided?
Certainly, based on my experience at Pomona College and within the Claremont Colleges Consortium as a whole, it's been very much biased both among students, faculty, administrators, and I think just looking at the list of microaggressions and triggers and things like that various schools are publishing that are getting some attention in the media lately, it's very clear that you can see situations where certain views are just unacceptable under any circumstances. So recently at the University of Oklahoma, for example, a student was told she was not allowed to sing Rihanna songs because that was cultural appropriation. She's not from Barbados herself. And so I think, a lot of times schools are just really crossing the line in terms of what they think is necessary in order to keep students safe, when really they're just hiding students from certain ideas or even certain people. So in my home state of Illinois, for example, the University of Illinois has deemed it a microaggression for a room to be full of all or mostly white people. So if you walk into a room and either everyone or the majority of people in the room happen to be white, that's seen as a microaggression as well. And so I think based on my experiences and based on really the experiences of students at public and private universities all over the country, it's very much a source of indoctrination where the faculty and administrators are sort of putting rules in place and publishing official statements that make certain ideas acceptable and others unacceptable.
So Chris, on a different level, on your own campus, if you could explain to the audience your kind of story of the repercussions of dealing with political correctness, and now whether or not you think those ramifications were justified.
Right.
So last year I served as the president of my student body at Occidental College. And with 2 weeks remaining in the year, 12 of the fellow members of my student government voted to remove me from that office. And I was never really provided a reason during that time for why I was being removed. After the fact, they did provide some ambiguous justifications, but my perception of it was that I was removed because they saw me in opposition to a proposal which was on the table for our student government to vote on. The proposal was to create a large sum of money to be used for addressing concerns of diversity and equity on my college's campus. And I was not in opposition to it, but I did ask critical questions to try to create some constructive conversation about this proposal instead of just blindly raising student body fees. And my perception is for that reason I was removed. I don't think that was justified. I think it would be much more beneficial if we all work together and have these opposing viewpoints or these contradicting viewpoints to really push forward discussion.
So during that process, was there any time, did you deal solely with the fellow members of your student body, or did the administration get involved at all?
The administration was not involved at all in that process, which was somewhat frustrating.
So you felt like they should have been?
It would have been nice to have some support in that regard. I think that I was removed without any sort of due process. However, after the fact, instead of just blindly accepting that decision from my fellow members on the student government, I did appeal that process and I was reinstated to serve out the remainder of my term.
And so you were removed as president for 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
And then?
Reinstated with 24 hours remaining in my term. So, not much I could have done with that.
And were there any other people that were involved and supportive of you, or were you all alone in that process?
So I was removed as well with 2 other members of the student government. The difference was my 2 colleagues on the student government who were removed, they didn't really stand up or try to fight back. And I think that actually gets at a very important question, is what one does when they feel that they are being silenced, shamed, brought down through political correctness. What do you do in that moment? I think it's very important to actually take a stand and stand up for oneself.
So they went into hiding of sorts?
They were absolutely inactive, didn't want to go through any sort of appeals process at all.
And could you explain a little more to the resolution that you wanted to get passed, because it was a little vague? Because it seemed as if it was supportive of political correctness and diversity.
Yeah, it was a proposal to raise student body fees by about $40,000 to establish a fund which would be used to support diversity and equity initiatives on our campus. My concern was that it was a very vague proposal. What does diversity and equity really mean on our campus? And I felt that instead of simply raising student body fees, we should have looked for alternative sources of funding before we blindly increase the amount of money that college students are paying at already extremely expensive campuses.
And I'd just like to come in here, Chris. I think what your example points toward, and what many of the other examples will point toward that you'll hear about tonight, is not just kind of an implicit or a docile call for safety and comfort. It's an offensive, moral, and kind of political policing tactic. It's nothing less than silencing. So that's what we have to keep in mind tonight. And I would just ask the audience to keep in mind the following question. Even if we grant that these calls for safety and comfort are themselves reasonable and grounded in something sufficient, which I think there's reason to doubt that fact, but even if we do that, I wonder if it's worth giving up free speech over. And I think the answer there is certainly no.
Have any of you felt in certain scenarios that you felt like your right to speech was taken away from you?
Yeah, so I'd like to start by sort of just building a little bit off of what Chris said. So, listening to his story, hearing that he got reinstated with just 24 hours left in his term, it's pretty clear that this was just a purely symbolic action. And we actually had our fair share of that at the Claremont colleges last semester, the biggest incident of which was a series of kind of Mizzou and Yale-style protests that erupted on our campuses ultimately led to the forced resignation of the dean of students and the junior class president over very minor infringements. And so one of the resulting outcomes from those protests and from the resignations were the establishment of these safe spaces on the various campuses. And these safe spaces were a little bit more extreme even than a lot of the safe spaces many of you have probably read about in the media. In these cases, white students were not allowed to enter under any circumstances. They specifically said in some of the notes describing these events, you may want to bring a white friend or ally with you, but to ensure that this is a safe and comfortable space for people of color, we ask that you do not. So in my role as the editor of the school paper, I wrote an article about it. It was objective, no opinion, no analysis, no commentary of any kind, just all quotes, all descriptions from these various events. Again, their words, not mine. And I found myself called in for a meeting with my boss at my on-campus job at the writing center, where I was told that my boss had read my article and wasn't so fond of it and was concerned that my presence in the writing center would make students feel unsafe, and that there might be some connection that they start to see between the writing center and my work with the Claremont Independent. And so my shift was canceled, and I was given a fun bit of light reading called Heteropatriarchy and the Three Pillars of White Supremacy. And again, this is over a news article that didn't even contain any of my own thoughts. I just said, here's some events that took place, here's what they were according to them. So I think in many cases, what we're seeing on college campuses is just an outrage culture, where when something is brought to people's attention that they don't want to see, they try to just make a big scene and try to do everything they can to ostracize the person who said it and prevent them from wanting to say things like that in the future, and tell them that they're making other people feel unsafe or feel triggered, or any one of these buzzwords that they like to throw around. And in many cases, I think it's just really gotten out of control.
Andrew, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to comment on the idea, I guess, of a safe space itself. And I think this is going to be a theme that you're going to hear a lot tonight, because it has been in the news a lot. It's honestly a very contentious issue. And you're going to hear a lot of comments about how a quote-unquote safe space ended up excluding a particular viewpoint. And I want to be flat out here. I do not think that's what a safe space is, and I think I think there's a phenomenon in this country in which, and I'm going to quote the Atlantic magazine on this, that safe spaces have been weaponized, and safe spaces are being used to exclude viewpoints. I want to read to you a definition of a safe space. I'm going to read two definitions, actually, both pretty quick. The first one is a safe space is a place where anyone can relax and be fully able to express without fear of being made uncomfortable, unsafe, on account of their biological sex, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender
and who
identity.
defined these? Who defined, where these definitions come from?
Yeah, this is from a Tumblr post, actually. It's called Safe Space Network, I guess, and it's also the top Google result for safe spaces definitions. And then one of the other definitions is from a commenter on Urban Dictionary. And it says, a safe space is a place where college students can go if they have been subjected to ideas that differ from the progressive narrative. Presumably this allows them to recover from trauma, free from lasting damage resulting from exposure to ideas that conflict with their leftist professors. And you look at these, and these are not describing the same thing. The first one really makes a case almost in defense of free speech for the use of a safe space, that anybody, regardless of their background, should be able to say what they want. And the second one makes the case that this other type of safe space that we're hearing about, and that's really being used as a justification to shut down perspectives. And I just want to, I guess, challenge everybody to think of the first definition of the safe space as what a safe space really is, and to think about what safe spaces can do, because they're being used incorrectly, and that needs to stop. But I think at the core of it, we shouldn't villainize the term safe space, and that's what I wanted to push back on.
So do you think that these have had to be created, or they're talked about and it's become a buzz phrase on college campus because there isn't an understanding of free speech and political correctness as a whole in society, specifically amongst college students?
I mean, that's possible. That's a complicated issue, I guess. One thing I'd say is that I think when safe spaces get weaponized a lot, it is often the result of kind of groupthink and people confusing, people trying to, I guess, hijack a term in some ways, and in order to make it mean something that it really was never intended to mean. And I think in the case of these, when safe spaces are shutting out entire viewpoints, that's a case in which people are saying a safe space is shutting out a viewpoint, but they really don't have a safe space in the first place. And so I think it's partially a result as a misunderstanding, and I think it's a partially a result of confusion about really what the core contention and the core focus and the intent of a safe space is, which is really to make a bunch of different viewpoints come to light.
Nick, you look like you wanted to respond.
Yeah. So I would also challenge two senses in which we can imagine the safe space. There's the physical one, where you imagine some police tape around some cones where only a certain type of people are allowed in. But then there's the kind of metaphysical sense in which you can imagine a safe space. And I think this is the one that's more relevant, in fact, to our discussion today. The safe space in that second sense represents not just a physical boundary, but it represents a culture. It represents a set of norms and mores that are being adopted. And that's the worry. The worry is not just a semantic one. It's that we're seeing that latter kind of safe space spring up. It's happening. It's happening on the ground across our college campuses. And the question that we're here to talk about today is why and whether or not that's bad. So at the end of the day, I agree with Andrew in some sense. The college campus, the university, should be a safe space for critical inquiry, the safe space for the competition of ideas uninhibited by these sorts of political and moral presuppositions that already cloud the realm of what's apt for debate.
So piggybacking on that a little bit, because you talked about what you know, the college should be a place for that. Do you guys think that there's a different, and maybe we can take someone that's like covers what you think about private universities versus a public university. Should public universities have different type of free speech and safe space policies and political correct policies than private ones?
So I'm the sole player at the public university up here, so I don't mean to hijack the conversation, but just from my experience, I do in fact believe that there is a particularly pertinent interest in free speech that we have to recognize within the public university that is, of course, still there in the private university, but not in that privileged sense. So I just want to quickly read you a line from UC Berkeley's mission statement and a line from Harvard's, public and a private. Berkeley, from a group of academic pioneers in 1868 to the free speech movement in 1964, Berkeley is a place where the brightest minds from across the globe come together to explore, ask questions, and improve the world. Harvard, beginning in the classroom with exposure to new ideas, new ways of understanding, and new ways of knowing, students embark on a journey of intellectual transformation. So you can see the obvious analog here, but I think that there's something behind the scenes that's important to keep in mind. Private institutions have a certain autonomy that public institutions don't. Public institutions are accountable to and serve the public. In fact, the University of California was created to promote the competition of ideas, to promote the sort of foundation and to sustain the sort of foundation that we collectively think and deem necessary to sustain a liberal democracy. So while there are similarities, I just would urge everyone to keep in mind that there are key differences, and the offshoot is that we should be particularly circumspect when we see free speech being curtailed on public campuses, because there's a particularly important reason to raise your eyebrows there.
You know, I can, go ahead.
From the private perspective?
Yeah, I can speak for my fellow private school students up here. Private institutions are a bit different in that they have more leeway to restrict speech on their campuses. But what you used to see is these private schools promoting themselves as beacons of free speech to try and attract students to their campus. But now you've seen a shift toward trying to make their students feel comfortable, and they're restricting these same freedoms they used to promote under the guise of safe spaces and free speech zones.
So you talked about the purpose of college a little bit, both of you there in your answers. Nic from the private or the public perspective, and you from the private. And you mentioned comfortable, and Nic mentioned diversity of ideas. So I kind of want to ask each of you, and Stephen, we can start with you. Then to you, what is the intrinsic role of a university or a college? What is its sole purpose?
I think the big thing that a college or a university should strive to do is just to teach you new things, and a very important component of that, obviously, is going to be exposing you to ideas that you haven't heard before. So, you look at people in our generation, college-age people are generally about 70% Democrats, 30% Republicans. The Republicans tend to concentrate towards specific schools. I know my school, for example, Pomona College, is only 8% conservatives. So if we have a very left-leaning student body, and the professors are very left-leaning, and the administrators are very left-leaning, then most of the students are coming into the school and being exposed to ideas that they've already heard and already agree with. So I feel like for me, as a more conservative student in that environment, I'm actually getting a much better education. I'm getting a lot more for my money than a lot of my peers who are more on the left side of the aisle, as a result of the fact that I'm actually experiencing what you're supposed to be experiencing in college, and I'm getting exposed to ideas I haven't heard before. I'm forced to challenge my own beliefs. I'm forced to really think about my own opinions, and I get a much better, much broader understanding of any particular contentious issue.
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree entirely with that. I think that the creation of educational institutions is to prepare us for moving out and really being the next generation who's going to try to fix some of the problems that exist within the United States and the world. And to do that, we need to be able to have very open and frank conversations. I think at times that is limited in our colleges today, but I think that the purpose of educational institutions really is to challenge us, like many of my peers here are saying.
I am 90% in agreement with that. I think,
but get to the part where you disagree. That'll be more interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So the point where I draw the line is I think in some college residential programs, I think there does need to be a larger emphasis on political correctness, even if that does come at least somewhat at the expense of free speech in the sense that you can express any idea what you want in almost any words you want. I think,
and would apply for you on public and private universities.
I think by and large it applies. It applies specifically in situations like at Stanford. Our housing situation is freshman year. You get put into a dormitory that you don't choose, with a roommate you don't choose, with hall neighbors you don't choose, and without a way to get out of it, basically. And the problem, I think it's a great system in a lot of ways. It's what a lot of people speak as is the highlight of their Stanford experience. But one of the problems with that is if you do get in a situation in which you have neighbors or you have a roommate that holds quite hostile opinions or uninformed opinions or very well informed but negative opinions about whatever groups or you identify with, like that can be a real challenge to you getting the most out of university, and there's not a whole lot of way to switch out of that. And while that's not necessarily, that may be speech that would be okay in the real world. In the real world, you have a choice. You can move somewhere else. You can tolerate that. And I'm not saying that we have to completely shut down intellectual conversations in dormitories, because that's really where a lot of the learning comes from in college. But I think there need to be certain affordances made for systems like these.
So what type of exceptions would you want a university to offer students in a situation like that then?
I mean, I think it just has to be to the point where there are some general common standards in a dormitory discussed maybe at the beginning of the year, or even kind of discussed as the year goes on, that, look, if you hold an opinion that's really hostile toward a person, or that really is pushed on, try to just approach it from a positive perspective. Don't use, the idea isn't so much that you can't talk about it, because that is one of the most important things, but don't start a war over it, I guess, would be the afford.
Real quick, because I know that Nic wants to jump in here, though. Do you think that it's difficult for a university then to try to manage the perspectives or the things that might offend maybe different cultures or different genders or different backgrounds?
I don't think this needs to be a...
And then how do you manage the difference between that and like hate speech?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely you can't really have a top-down system here necessarily. Like, I don't mean that the university should explicitly state the amount of the speech that is acceptable, because again, you know, I don't think I don't want to shut down the notion of a college dorm as an intellectual space, because I think that's one of the reasons probably all of us, I believe, went to residential colleges. But I think there just needs to be a line, and it has to be very person to person, but the resources have to be there in a case in which a living environment that you can't get out of is really harmful and really pushes you from actually pursuing your opinion and getting the most out of your college experience.
Did anybody want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in there too. And you may have agreed with me 90%, but I agree with you 100% on that one. I think that there are very distinct parts of college experience. There's the academic classroom setting, and then there's also the residential setting. And I think, you know, really emphasizing that you do want to be comfortable where your residential location is. And in college settings, you may be able to drop a class if you feel uncomfortable in that situation, which may detract from your educational experience, but you can leave a class if you so choose. On my college, you have to live on campus for 3 years, and not being able to escape an uncomfortable environment in that sense, I think that can be detrimental to education for college students. Similar to where my living situation now, off campus, that for me, I would say is a very safe space. I don't need to be pestered by individuals who dislike me, have issues with me, annoying bosses, all of that. I can really escape in my home, and for me, that does seem like a safe space. So I think replicating that in some sense in a college residential setting is beneficial while not shutting down the educational aspect, because it truly is residential education. You do have your views challenged in that setting, but making sure that it can be constructive learning as well.
Nick, why don't you respond real quick, and then I'll ask my last question of the panel before we get to the audience. So just raise your hand and gesture to Jonathan or one of the other staffers in the back if you have a question you'd like to ask.
Since when did we just start assuming as our baseline that college students, especially college students at top universities, need a lesson in how to act civilly 101? That's not the debate we're having. We're not having a debate about how it's just intuitively reasonable that a new roommate should reserve certain types of judgments. That's not what we're talking about. So I just want to reposition what I think the debate is really about here. It's not about these kind of small instances of what I would call just general civility. This is about people curtailing your rights, your speech, often through force, and whether or not that is right, and whether or not that's conducive to the university's mission. So I don't want us to get kind of lost in this you know, kind of mythical zone here where we're just equating political correctness with these sorts of considerations. That's not what we're concerned about. If that was the only problem, then I don't think we'd be having this debate.
So my final question for you all, and I'll start, Andrew, and work our way down the table, and maybe restate the university where you go and what year you are, and explain to the audience what's considered hate speech, whether as a collective kind of idea based on what the student body talks about, and then what is actually written and included in the university's rules.
So yeah, I think what...
and you're at Stanford.
I am at, sorry, I am
That's
at
okay.
Stanford. The two different things here, what the university and what the student body accept are very different things. The university actually at Stanford, I've never actually heard of them undergoing a hate crime prosecution, and I was a RA in a dorm of over 90 students. We didn't have a single issue with that, at least from a university perspective. In terms of what's considered at the social level, these debates spring up, and it's largely in the form of op-ed writing and things posted in newspapers and discussions on social media sites like Yik Yak. And ultimately, I think that's a fairly healthy environment for it, because really, if we are protecting free speech, then being able to take out an op-ed in your school newspaper and write about how a certain phrasing struck you as hate speech is really kind of the ideal scenario. And it's up to the person to take that as a personal attack. But if that's really, I don't find that objectionable, because if that's really the objectionable part, then the person who's claiming their free speech is being impinged on is really just making the same claim a little bit after the first person, the person who found their speech offensive in the first place. So,
Nick, what qualifies as hate speech on your campus?
Hate speech on my campus, and I think in general, is Pandora's box, and that's the problem. Hate speech is absolutely anything that a person takes offense to who's in the position, usually of, well, I mean, we're not going to be politically correct here. So, you know, the way hate speech works is you have to be a member of the victim group, generally speaking. We can all imagine the different instantiations of that. So long as you're perceived as the victim, you can wield virtually uncheckable power in defining what is and is not hate speech. And that's what's so scary about it.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat sort of what everyone else is saying about hate speech, but you know, I took a look through Chapman's conduct code. It pretty much looks like every standard university conduct code when it comes to hate speech. But you know, if we're talking about political correctness and if it's media hype or not, you know, I saw some UCI apparel in the audience. If you guys remember last year, they tried to ban the American flag from their campus because it might be offensive to illegal immigrants. You know,
that's also offensive, by the way. You can't
right.
say illegal immigrants.
My apologies.
Undocumented
right.
persons.
And even, you know, Chapman is more apolitical than you know, schools like Berkeley over here. But you do have instances. You know, in one of my classes, I was told to curb my racism because I said that the Black Lives Matter movement is potentially doing more harm than good for race relations. And I was told to curb my racism, and people were cheering in the classroom. So,
Who told you to curb your racism?
My professor.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what class was this?
Just upper division political science class, like American political thought, like a theory class. So, you know, folks, this is not media hype. This is happening 15 minutes away from us in Orange County. So.
Chris.
Hi, Chris. So at Occidental College, I also looked through the student handbook, and I tried to find any instance where it mentions hate speech, and it really doesn't. What it does mention, though, is a procedure called a bias incident report, where one can report any bias that they perceive is against them, and the procedure for that is it goes to our college administration, and I really have no idea what that procedure looks like or what parameters they use, which...
So it's kind of a vague gray area?
Which naturally you can imagine can present an issue at times when you don't really have set guidelines for policies that you're trying to enforce. People don't know if they're violating any of these policies. So at my college itself, that can present an issue, I believe.
And Stephen, you're at Pomona, correct?
Yeah, so fortunately, I actually haven't seen too many issues from our administration specifically when it comes to hate speech being defined too broadly. But again, Pomona is part of a consortium of 5 small undergraduate colleges, kind of all on the same campus. And there have been huge issues with this kind of thing at the other schools. So recently, for example, Pitzer College and Scripps College, both of their, I can't remember if it was the president or vice president or some high-up administrator sent out emails to the student body condemning the word Trump as hate speech. And the phrase "Make America," not even "Make America Great Again," just "Make America," was deemed hate speech. And the administration at Scripps College disinvited George Will from giving a speech in their conservative lecture series, which was designed in order to provide students with an opportunity to hear views they didn't agree with. And the reason they canceled his invitation was because they didn't agree with some views that he had expressed in a column. So again, at a lot of these schools, it's just an instance of the administration doesn't like it, so it's not allowed. And as some of the other panelists have noted, really it's the students often who are driving some of the biggest issues. And for us, a lot of that is seeping into the student government. So the student government at Pomona, for example, removed funds from an event on campus. It was going to be a a mad scientist theme party, and they said the term mad scientist is offensive to people with mental illnesses. And then the
Did
student
they ever
senate-
see Back to the Future? Like,
I'm sure that's offensive too. Maybe they put a trigger warning on it. It's okay. We had a yacht club that was turned down because the word yacht is offensive to low-income students, and we had a local chapter of the Dream Catchers Foundation, which is actually just a really nice charity that essentially tries to provide happy experiences for terminally ill hospice patients. That was shut down by the student government because they said the organization's name, the Dream Catchers Foundation, was cultural appropriation towards Native Americans, despite the fact that the founder of the organization was herself Native American. So sometimes, it doesn't have to be an administrator who is making the call on, what's hate speech in order for it to impact campus life. Sometimes it's just students who are in positions of power who have the ability to really curtail other students' freedom of speech and freedom of association and freedom to start organizations and participate in activities that they want to do. So I think, again, in those cases, it's really gotten out of hand, and it's really just become so much of a stretch where any little complaint, if even one person is upset by something, it's not going to be allowed.
okay, so we're going to take some questions from the audience right now.
Thank you, Alicia. As Alicia mentioned, the panel will be able to answer your questions. Just raise your hand and I'll pass the mic on by. But I first wanted to ask, and I'll direct this question towards Nic first, just to kick Q&A off. A lot of people of religious faith, a lot of the beliefs they hold are probably offensive in this PC culture. How is religious life faring on campus these days?
So I don't identify with a major religion or anything like that, but I'm certainly of the opinion, as you might suspect, that religious liberty is it's a tenet of our belief system in this country. No matter what you believe, you know that you're allowed to believe it, especially when the context is religious. So I think the others might be more perhaps qualified to speak about this if anybody is of a particular faith, but just on the higher level, it's clear that this sort of censorship that we're seeing does call into question religious liberty, which is something that we should all be weary of and skeptical of, regardless of whether or not we hold a certain faith near and dear.
Yeah, so I guess I'm a Jewish student, so if someone just wanted to hear a quick perspective on that, I think for me the big issue when it comes to religious liberty on campus is more tied to the Israel-Palestine conflict, where, once again, as I've been talking about all night, students, faculty, administrators all have this very set position on that particular issue, and it's sort of viewed as, Jews who are not actively going out and talking about how much they hate Israel are sort of seen as these bad guys. And so I think that's really the only way it's been affecting me and my religious affiliation.
And I think we have our first question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Eric. I'm a fellow Chapman student, so I can attest it's not too bad on campus, but there's still no conservative narrative portrayed on a consistent basis.
True.
But my main question is for the whole panel. Has there been an effort to let big-time donors know about what's going on campus? Because for private institutions, as well as public institutions, they really rely on private donors to fund their big science buildings and so on and so forth. I was wondering if you guys could speak to that.
Anybody? I think
It's a great idea. Even at Berkeley, 88% of our funding comes beyond the state, which is something that maybe not a lot of people know, but it's pretty interesting. So only about 10 to 12% of UC Berkeley's funding comes from the state. So even in our case, even in the public university's case, that's relevant. And it's only becoming more relevant as we see, defunding kind of systematically across the board. So I think that's a great idea.
I know at Occidental College, 1/3 of our entire operating budget comes from donors. So whether that's $5 or $1 million, that goes into how we do operate. In regards to letting the larger donors know, I think that our college does an exceptional job of reaching out. to people through newsletters, and I know that in our most recent edition of our alumni magazine, there was a huge feature about the sort of discussions in the current campus climate, which really let them know about what is occurring on our campus. One way that they did try to raise awareness about it was they created a fund where people could contribute money that would go towards bringing conservative speakers to campus to try to challenge the overly liberal dominance on our college campus. And I think that's one way that you can really bring in people who might sort of have doubts about current political makeups on our college campus. That's one way to bring people back into interacting with the college.
Okay, I think we have another one in the back.
Hi, guys. I'm Barbara, and I just want to say thanks for being here. It gives me hope to see guys like you up there talking the way you're talking right now. But my question kind of piggybacks on this. What's the fix? Are we going down a dark precipice? There's no way out of this mess? Or are there plans? Is there hope to change what's happening right now?
I'm personally very optimistic. I think sort of as has become clear throughout the evening as we've been talking about these issues, it's just gotten so out of control that every single day, a new person finds themselves an outsider. And so, it's sort of this pendulum theory. It can only swing so far. I think before too long, people are going to kind of take a look in the mirror and go, oh, this is very stupid. And when that day comes, I think that people are going to kind of start embracing free speech a little bit more, start recognizing the importance of confronting ideas you disagree with rather than trying to just shelter yourself from them.
It's tough thinking of a concrete solution for this problem because it is a big problem on college campuses. But, one place where we could start is just to teach the kids the Constitution. It's 4 pages long, and even in a lot of my political science classes, they don't even mention it, really. It's the basis for everything in this country. So, and you'd be surprised how many kids know nothing about the United States Constitution. So I think once you see more constitutional education and constitutional knowledge, I think a lot of these problems will go away because people understand their rights more.
I agree totally with that. I think it's a great thing to push more civics education to really open up these debates. And I think one of the great features of college is that it starts over again every 4 years. So it's the important thing is that we change the messaging for the future and really emphasize the positive aspects of what's coming out. And by 4 years from now, it's going to be a totally different environment. And I hope it's one that's more constructive than today.
Okay, Jonathan, has someone else?
Hi, my name is Jessica. So I have a question about affirmative action. So colleges are trying to take people from different races to look more appealing. How do you think that this affects political correctness on campuses?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think what we're touching on, what you're trying to touch on is this broader concept of identity politics. What we're seeing is this us versus them mentality just blossom. All of the talk is about my safe space and not yours. It's all about, my race, class, and gender and not yours. And I would even go further and say there's a sort of essentialist solipsism kind of ingrained in there, where people are even epistemologically, in terms of how they're envisioning we can even come to know things is excuse me, pernicious, in the sense that each man and each woman is the measure of his and her own truth. That's what this essentialist solipsism is. We find different identity groups, even with theories of intersectionality. The whole point is, if you have different identity attributes, you have to be treated as different than any other independent attribute. So if you're a white, straight male, you have to be treated differently than a white, bisexual male. You can see where this is going. So I think the identity politics game is really dangerous. It's perpetuating this us versus them mentality. And under all of that is this really dangerous epistemology that we have to be conscious of, because it's saying that we are unable to understand each other's experiences inherently unless we share the same identity attributes. And that's just to me, it's blatantly absurd, but it's also just something that we can't believe if we ever aspire to have these conversations across time, barriers of race, class, gender, blah, blah, blah.
All right, let's keep it moving with another question.
Yes, I know I was raised with the idea that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. I think most of the people in the room have probably heard this, if not been raised under that. So with that in mind, why is the solution not for each person to simply be responsible for their own reactions to what people say, however hateful they may be, and then we get on with our lives? And then with that in mind, are there any schools that you know of, organizations at your schools that advocate for that kind of a policy?
Yeah, so I think, as an econ major, I think you can think of ideas sort of like the way you would think of any other marketplace. So if you're selling a product, if it's a good product, people are going to buy it. If it's a bad product, people are not going to buy it. So with free speech, if people are able to express any ideas they want, some of the ideas that come out are going to be a little bit crazy, and maybe someone who's saying those things is not going to have a lot of people agree with them, might find themselves confronted often, until they either have to decide, I really stick with my convictions, I really think the right thing, I understand this issue very well, and I'm going to stick to what I believe, or they're going to come to a point where they say, oh, maybe there's a reason everybody disagrees with me. So I think if we encourage free speech, we enable people to make those decisions for themselves, rather than having some governing body say, oh, what you're saying is going to hurt someone's feelings. Wait for someone whose feelings are hurt to go up to you and explain why their feelings are hurt. And maybe they can explain to you and convince you why you might not want to hold that opinion in the future, or maybe you can convince them why they shouldn't be offended by it. But the challenge right now is that that's not really the way people are approaching this sort of issue, and it's very much an idea of someone is trying to speak out on behalf of many others in the community and trying to help them avoid any ideas they don't like and protect them from these things when they really might not need any protection at all. Like, as you said, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words really don't hurt you. And I think people really need to go to college and have that be the reality and have it be something where you yourself have to sort of stand up for your principles and speak out against those you disagree with, rather than having someone else try and do it for you.
And honestly, I think in the majority of cases, because you're never going to hear about the time when somebody says something offensive and somebody says, hey, that offends me, and then they have a discussion about that and they hug at the end, and it doesn't make good news. New York Times doesn't want to run that. But and I think that is really what happens in the vast majority of situations, and the ones that you really do hear about are situations in which power is really in play, and it could be power in the form of a university administrator saying something, or it could be power, it could be power in a lot of different subtexts, and that's kind of when it becomes a news story, and I think that's, it's obviously, this is a very obviously complicated issue that depends a lot on the individual facts of an individual case, but I think that's the stuff that we have to be a little more careful of.
So this is for everyone. So kind of to be a little bit of devil's advocate, as 5 white males, can I get the perspective of people of other ethnicities or gender from your respective campuses, or age too?
You mean the perspective of how other people on their specific campuses feel about this topic? Okay. Kyle, you want to start with that, or?
Yeah, I do know him. He is my friend from Chapman. I don't quite understand your question, Matt, but I'll kind of just go there and see if...
I understood the question to be, no offense, y'all are all white dudes. We already discussed I'm a dropout, and I'm on the old side of the millennial because I just turned 30.
No,
but I think your perspective was, can they speak to what other people of other cultures and women potentially think on campuses about this issue?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of relates to the affirmative action question earlier too, because if a university has that mindset of, okay, we need to take more black people, or we need to take more Asian people, that's like saying that all black people think the same and act the same, or all Asian people think the same, and it's like saying Asians are a monolithic voting bloc, which they're not, because clearly there are black people who think differently than other black people, as there are white people who think differently than white people. So when you have issues of free speech, it's very objective. It's in the Constitution. It's the First Amendment, and you know, when you get into hate speech, it's much more subjective, and you know, like you never, when you say something on Twitter or whatever, you never know who you're gonna offend, and you know.
In only 140 characters too.
Right. Because you know the persecution for hate speech now is the Twitter mob coming after you, and calling for you to be fired because you said something slightly politically incorrect, and now someone has to find a new way to support their family because, you know, the Twitter mob came after them. So I don't exactly, Matt, you want to follow up there? Like,
Andrew, do you have an answer to that, or?
I mean, I think it is. It's the short answer. You know, and again, it's a case-by-case thing. I think a lot of people in the United States right now feel that they aren't necessarily being advocated for correctly. And I think that a lot of the solution to that has been to, hey, look, like we need to come together and rally around this lack of representation, or whatever you want to call it. And I think in some sense it's kind of invoking the right to assembly, and I think there's a lot of value for that. You know, it's again, where it becomes more of an issue is when you start to legislate that way or something, because that's a problem when there are specific exclusionary groups that do doing that. But you know, on a whole, like getting together with friends who are like you in whatever way and talking about issues that are important to you, even if they're largely the same, is not really a bad thing. And you know, I guess that's how at least some of my friends who would maybe have a different viewpoint would say it. Yeah.
Yeah, just really quickly, I just wanted to comment on something. I think at work here also is this presumption that certain identities have these, just inherently have common experiences. So if you're, this is not my presumption, but this is the presumption of those who are contradicting free speech. They're presuming that identity is chief, that you're being an African-American cisgender female, that's what defines you. That defines your ideas, that defines everything about you. And I think that's the most perilous part of this. I think it's absolutely wrong. What we value about individuals is not these secondary, second-order characteristics. What we value about each other is that we owe one another the dignity of just associated with being a conscious human being with agency and decision-making power. So those are the things we should care about, somebody's ideas and not their identity attributes.
Let's go to our last question from the audience.
Good evening. My biggest issue is, how did we even get here? Earlier the gentleman from Pomona said that whites weren't allowed a certain area. I'm a United States Marine, or was a United States Marine, I'm a veteran now, and we'd never had these kind of issues. I cannot hear something like that and believe that somewhere in America that we've gotten to a place like that. To me, that is just outrageous. I cannot believe that. And I guess my question is, how did we become so sensitive? I mean, you hear all the time of the generations before us, where parents tell you, get over it, walk it off. You know, there is none of that today. Everyone, every single person's, every single cry is everyone else's problem.
Chris, do you want to take that? Or?
Yeah, I think it's something that, wow, it's such a complicated and frustrating question. But I think, you know, it has to go back to what is happening in education right now. And Kyle, you mentioned a stat earlier that 96%, I believe it was, of donations that came from college Ivy League faculty went to sort of more liberal-leaning politicians. And I think that, honestly, that's one of the issues, is that we have really a singular set of beliefs that are being told to students, and that the issue is that students aren't really speaking up. and standing up in opposition to that viewpoint. And I think that that's the enemy of free speech, is that there seems to just be so much complacency while all of this is going on, which is why I think we need more forums like this and more discussion and more dialogue on this topic. Because I really feel like it's the complacency aspect that gets to the heart of this.
I actually think actually that this problem begins much earlier in life. I think it starts long before college. I think this is a byproduct of a generation of parents who controlled every aspect of their children's lives. And I'm thankful every single day that my parents taught me how to stand up for myself, how to solve my own problems, how to, just fix something when it's broken. And so I think now what we're seeing is a generation of children who never grew up going to college. Mommy and daddy aren't there anymore, so the administration has to fill that role for them.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, first of all, thank you for your service. And guys, this stuff is really happening on college campuses every day. If you know who Bill Maher is, the left-leaning, to say the least, the left-wing talk show host absolutely condemns PC and rails against these instances of political correctness and safe spaces on campus. And for such a devout liberal to do that, that's very telling. And he said he wanted, in the case of the Trump scandal with the chalk,
The chalkening.
The chalkening, that's good. He said he wanted to. I mean, these kids said they didn't feel safe on their own campus because they saw Trump 2016 on the sidewalk, and because it's invading their safe spaces. And this stuff happens all the time, and they'd probably not feel safe just by wearing this hat. So, sorry if I'm triggering anybody here. I don't want to trigger anybody. It's just a red hat. It's just a red hat.
And I just really quickly, because Kyle mentioned Bill Maher, I just have to mention Bill Maher was invited to speak at UC Berkeley last December for the commencement, and Bill Maher incited protests at Berkeley. So that's
Wasn't
all
it by
I'll
the
say.
Muslim Students Association specifically?
It was the Muslim Students Association, but it was much broader. There were formal calls to disinvite him as a speaker, and then there were loud, obnoxious demonstrations while he was trying to speak. So I don't know what to say if progressives don't even like their own who happen to disagree with them. I don't know what to say to that.
So in closing tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to remind you of the question at hand, and it is political correctness on campus an enemy of free speech? And in closing, we're going to have Nic arguing for free speech, and Chris is going to be, talking about the political correctness side of that. Each gentleman will have 90 seconds.
I'll try to stay within.
We know you like to talk.
Yeah. Michael Bloomberg spoke at Harvard in 2014 at their commencement, and he said the following about college campuses. Their purpose is not only to advance knowledge, but to advance the ideals of our nation. Today, I'd like to talk with you about how important it is for that freedom to exist for everyone, no matter how strongly we may disagree with one another's viewpoints. Tolerance for other people's ideas and the freedom to express your own are inseparable values at great universities joined together. They form a sacred trust that holds the basis of our democratic society. The reason Michael Bloomberg said this was that he was delivering nothing less than a scathing critique of Harvard and the other Ivies, and perhaps more broadly, just the general state of the university. Michael Bloomberg proves that this is not an ideological or a political issue. This is an issue of how we as American people are viewing the competition of ideas in that sphere and its importance. I'd like to just say one more thing. We have to be cognizant of what we care about here. What does it say about us if the issues of our time revolve around trigger warnings and comfort? I'm embarrassed by that. So I would just ask, what happened to us? Why are these the issues of our time? Why is the best that we can come up with and argue about what word someone used to describe you?
All right. Well, first, thank you all for being here. It's been really exciting. I've really enjoyed speaking with some of the fellow panelists here. And I'm proud to say that in my perception, that of the question, is political correctness an enemy of free speech on college campuses? My answer is no. I really don't think that political correctness as such is an enemy of free speech on college campuses. I believe that there are instances when terminologies and goals of political correctness are hijacked and used to silence opposing viewpoints, but I think that in its purest sense, political correctness is not intended in such a way. I believe that political correctness, in my sense of the term, should be used in order to further educate people on college campuses. And I can count many, many times where I have been approached about saying something that people felt was not politically correct, and I was able to have a dialogue with those people. And we were able to talk, come to agreements, come to even walk away with disagreements. But in its purest sense, that is the political correctness that I believe is needed on college campuses. In order to have that dialogue, I think that we do sometimes need concepts as safe spaces, trigger warnings, because that allows people to feel comfortable enough to be able to bring up topics to have that dialogue. So I still stand by it that political correctness in its purest sense is not necessarily an enemy of free speech on college campuses.
Thank you guys for those closing statements. So as you can see on the screens behind me, you guys can go on the Twitter and Facebook pages of the Nixon Foundation, but wait till you get in the car. Don't text and drive though. But or when you get home, be sure to like and follow those pages and answer this question. But kind of let's do what we did at the beginning with the presidential straw poll. I'd kind of like to hear a round of applause if you guys think that political correctness on campus is an enemy of free speech. Please give me a round of applause. And then if you do not think that political correctness is the enemy of free speech on campus, then please give us a round of applause. Chris.
Yeah, some of you didn't applaud, I saw you.
Thank you so much to our panel for giving us their time and their brains and their dialogue this evening. Thank you so much to Megan and Robert Zwirling and of course the Nixon Library and the Foundation for setting up this event this evening. And thank you all for coming. I'd like to welcome Megan and Robert back up on the stage.
Thank you, Alicia. And again, thank you all. Megan, you want to say a thanks?
Well, yes, of course, echoing the thanks that Alicia just said. To all of you for coming, the Nixon Foundation, especially Jonathan for working tirelessly with us, and our panelists for this lively discussion, and of course the moderator. I will hand it off to my dad for some closing words.
And to close on my side tonight, first of all, I have great fear of the future, and that's why we wrote the book, Vigilance, the Price of Liberty. After listening to you fine gentlemen tonight, I feel a lot better. And I'd like to thank you for taking your time, for coming here, for being articulate and intelligent. And I'll leave you with a thought. There are, in my view, three great documents, three great political documents: the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution of the United States of America. And we have a Bill of Rights to protect rights that we already have. The Constitution does not grant people rights. The Constitution is a grant of power or authority from the people to the government. And the Bill of Rights grants no right. There's no right to freedom of speech. It says, Congress shall pass no law abridging freedom of speech. So the Bill of Rights protects our rights that were considered so essential that they shouldn't be treaded upon by the government. And I'll leave you with this final quote from an Irish politician and judge. In 1790, just as our Constitution was being finalized and ratified the Bill of Rights that completed the Constitution, the condition upon which God hath given liberty to man is eternal vigilance which condition, if he break, servitude is at once the consequence of his crime and the punishment of his guilt. Be vigilant, be free.
Thank you, Robert Megan. Alicia, to our distinguished panel, please give them another round of applause. Robert and Megan will be available in the lobby to sign your book and meet every one of you. Thank you all for coming.